Hello. Thanks for joining in, and thank you to any replay viewers. So, I'm talking today about a lot of my usual topics, coronavirus, and looking forward now to how it's going to devastate the world and what might be some changes that result from that. Because not all of them just involve devastation, not all of them, involve loss of loved ones and frayed hospital systems and overtaxed healthcare workers. We can look at information coming out of both Italy and Iran. So in Italy, we've heard that healthcare workers are emotionally distraught, having to make decisions about whether to treat a 40-year-old with two children, or a 40-year-old in excellent health, or a 60-year-old with potentially less viable years ahead of time, and how there might be one bed available for one of those three patients you have to choose. And the Italian Medical Association published a document detailing a structure and a scaffold for how some of these decisions can be made. But obviously, when you're making those kind of decisions and you're putting little tags on the feet of people that can't be treated, that can be left in corridors rather than receive the oxygenation treatment that people need for 2 to 3 weeks for severe cases of the coronavirus 19, obviously that would be a significant strain on the psychological health of medical professionals as well as the functional capacity of hospitals. So I'm feeling a little more confirmed in my own understanding of the world today, just in terms of having advised people in my orbit to not invest in the stock exchange in recent weeks and months. And the people who ignored me are feeling reasonably regretful of doing so. As far as I understood it, in relation to coronavirus, there was a knowledge gap between some well-informed people and the rest of the world. And there were a lot of people who considered themselves to be responsible, who nevertheless were dismissing COVID-19 as equivalent to the common cold or the flu, etc., when the lethality of coronavirus is significantly higher than the flu. If it's 0.1% lethality associated with the flu, it's minimum 1% lethality associated with coronavirus, up to 8% for vulnerable populations, and seems to be settling on around 3.4% fatality rate generally. Of course, those figures change the more testing is done, because then you say, okay, well, actually, there's a lot of people with the disease, but also a lot of people with very severe cases who are dying in hospitals, and a lot of people dying on the street in Iran as well. I keep seeing video posted to Twitter of people in Iran, just somebody slumped in a shopping market, or people slumped on the street, or people just passing out and dying on sidewalks in public spaces, because I think the degree of health system breakdown in Iran is very pronounced. And being a totalitarian regime, as the Iranian government is, they are less honest with reporting than they might otherwise be. Now, here we go to a common theme of my broadcasting, which is that under a fascistic style government, they govern for optics. And the problem with governing for optics, when your optics and the support of your base is conditioned on how much you validate their racist worldview, how much you reassure them that they're right, that the world can just be fixed if you put some other people in camps and build walls to keep out the other people, then if that's not related to reality, you don't have leadership that's prepared to address reality. And if you also package that fascist style leadership with a mega degree of criminality, i.e. someone with a history of money laundering, bribery, and intimidation of journalists, who built his business empire on his ability to deceive the public about his wealth, to profit from facilitating crime, because money laundering is helping criminals keep their profits and make it look respectable. So, for instance, when you run a casino or you resell property for inflated prices, um, you are and you accept money from criminals, then you are taking a cut from their criminal proceeds to enhance your profits, in the knowledge that you are helping them get away with crimes such as human trafficking, selling people, selling drugs, and just essentially pimping out uh, slaves, women, children, even men on occasion, but more frequently women and children, who have been told that they're coming to America for a job or going anywhere around the world for a job, but they have to surrender their passport, and then they're sold into prostitution and have to generate profits for their employers, or owners rather, and are not released from servitude. So this is not just, oh, Mr. Ed saying he got to go. Thanks for joining in, Mr. Ed. Nice to see you. And hi, Brian. No, this is not capitalism we're talking about here. This is Trump criminality we're talking about. Australia refused Trump permission to build a casino in Sydney, Australia, 30 years ago, because the Australian Federal Police advised the New South Wales government, which is a state in Australia, New South Wales, they were advised that Trump had too many mafia connections. So that was underreported in American media because of American love for wealth and excess and gossip about somebody with the ladies. And Trump has been able to take advantage of that axiom of any publicity is good publicity and use his various divorces and his appearances with attractive women to build an impression of himself that's slotted in with American biases towards wealthy people, wealthy, tacky people. Some people don't like wealthy, tacky people, but enough people in America are impressed by gold toilets and impressed by television shows. Now, television shows like The Apprentice are constructed in a way to deceive people. They're fabricated realities, and more people obviously know that now, that a lot of The Bachelor and The Bachelorette have producers helping to manipulate dynamics behind the scenes, encourage people to be villains, etc. So yes, Trump's casinos were money laundering fronts, but even then, Trump was too incompetent to keep them afloat. So even with vast injections of the proceeds of crime, Trump still managed to overdo this lavish, tacky bollocks that he needed to do to try to sell himself as a wealthy person. Trump's business empire is predicated on leasing his name and leasing that association with wealth and extravagance and success, uniquely styled American success. So if you've never liked reality TV, then you're doing well. And you would be less vulnerable to having built up a false impression of Trump as a competent business person. If you suffered from that false understanding, then you were more likely to vote for him and more likely to then overlook evidence revealing your decision to vote for Trump as having been catastrophically terrible. So back to the COVID-19 and the fact that Democrats have written a bill to help smooth over hardship for people during the necessary periods of shutdown. So Trump's speech focused on travel restrictions, which is like trying to lock the barn after the horse is bolted, except even worse because Trump was giving exemptions to countries, remarkably enough, where Trump has golf courses. So Americans are probably suffering significantly at the moment. There was a small bounce in the share market when Biden first won South Carolina, and there was another bump in the share market when Trump won Super Tuesday. Vice presidents have not a perfect history, but a strong history of running for the presidency. So the markets know better than Bernie Sanders supporters do that he was a candidate that was likely to unify the vast majority of American Democratic voters who are older and more conservative than Twitter would have you think. So Twitter is a hotbed for Kremlin-backed, self-destructive spoiler candidacy. So all of the Bernie Sanders supporters you see saying they will never vote for Biden, Biden's the same as Trump, etc., etc. They are trying to use the same types of tactics that were used successfully against Hillary Clinton in 2016 to just peel off just enough votes from Hillary Clinton to cause her to lose at least the Electoral College, even if they couldn't stop her from winning the popular vote by approximately 3 million votes. But at least in that scenario, sexism, residual American sexism, was a compounding factor for the racist blindness to Obama's successful economic recovery that he initiated with his stimulatory measures, etc., and that Joe Biden helped with as well, helping to save Michigan's car manufacturing industry. So racist people were vulnerable to disinformation from Fox, causing people to overlook the economic recovery under Obama, making people more vulnerable to thinking the economy was terrible and needed Trump to save it. It's a widely adopted false stereotype that Trump supporters are all poor. People with an average income under $50,000 are actually more likely to have voted for Hillary Clinton. A large base of Trump supporters are white middle-class people without a college degree, and also evangelical people, who are also probably less likely than average similar income people to have a college degree, because evangelical people are often reasonably allergic to the concept of higher learning. So Kevin's saying he's surrounded by it now. The local college sent home 16,000 students, and he's a higher risk person too. Yes, I'm a high risk person too, I've realized, because I get asthma sometimes. Don't typically, but even having a degree of persistent asthma is obviously something making you more susceptible to experiencing a severe case of COVID-19. So someone asks me, how high is my horse? Pretty high horse that I have. Of course, sometimes I talk about things that are outrageous. That is one way of getting people's attention, is to focus on the scandals and the outrage. But more broadly speaking, we just have a general pattern that we can look at of fascistic governance across the history of democracy, whereby leaders are sometimes, aspirational leaders sometimes gain access to power by building up a base of people who have made various risk-benefit calculations, are concerned about terrorism or something, and they become very susceptible to charlatans telling them, I can solve all your problems, and I am the only one with the sufficient hardness of heart to block migrants, to imprison people in camps, to send the Jews away, whatever. So Hitler was selling himself as someone who could save the Germans from communism and debt. And he associated Jewish people with communism and bankers. And it wasn't that difficult for him to do it. The person who initiated the highly destructive, ultimately resulting often in mass murder ideology of communism was a non-practicing Jewish person called Karl Marx. So Hitler didn't have to try too hard to inflame community sentiment against Jews. But he also did it gradually over time. So initially, Hitler's party, in the first time he ran for election, won only 3% of the vote. But over time, he built it up to 33%. And then someone decided to give him a chance. I've forgotten the name of the position. Is it the Chancellor? Possibly the Chancellor of Germany invited Hitler to form part of a coalition government after an indeterminate election result. So Brian is immunosuppressed and an ICU nurse. Thank you, Brian. It must be very challenging for you at the moment, and I wish you all the best. So Hitler didn't govern in any way or shape or form that advanced the interests of the German people, but he certainly talked a lot about how he was going to advance the interests of the German people. So he built up Germany's military, and he imprisoned a lot of political enemies, and ultimately the German people were not well served. And I'm not just speaking in a moral sense of having to live on their conscience that millions of people died because of the leader that they supported. Millions upon millions of people, not just Jews, but all of the toll, the enormous toll of World War II, could be attributed to having not just facilitated Hitler, but dismissed him as a clown, as a buffoon, as someone ineffectual, as Hitler was frequently dismissed in the media for a long time. So, we should look to an instance of communism to understand a little bit more about what the Trump administration is doing. When there was when Mao was the communist leader of China, he tried to improve agricultural production using something called Lamarckism, which is when you believe that you can change the genetics of an organism by changing the conditions. So Lamarck believed that giraffes acquired longer necks through the process of stretching. So a parent stretching their neck to reach out for leaves from a tall tree would then transmit genes for that attribute of having a long neck to their children, which is not a broadly accepted explanation for the mechanism of evolution. Even though a lot of people are researching epigenetics now, so there may be, yes, there's likely to be some environmental impact on genes and gene activation. So some genes are already present, but they might be switched on if they're presented with certain environmental conditions. But anyway, trying to suddenly change agricultural processes according to this theory, which doesn't have Lamarckism, which didn't have much actual evidence or any evidence at that point in time. And now the evidence is for more. Well, anyway, epigenetics is quite a big thing to get into. I just want to say that Mao massively sabotaged agricultural production in China. And the people around him did not dare tell him of this. They painted vegetables. They painted wood. They carved wood into the shape of vegetables and painted it and photographed it to say, look at this enormous, bounteous harvest that has arisen as a result of your incredible innovations in the field of agriculture. So that type of kissing up to a leader can be seen at work in the Trump administration. We have Alex Azar, the secretary. What's he the secretary of? Secretary of Human Services, and Seema Verma, who is in charge of Medicare and Medicaid. And they're very competitive with each other and very adversarial towards each other. And Alex Azar has as his Twitter banner picture always a different picture of himself in the background with Trump to emphasize his loyalty. So you have people competing to illustrate their loyalty to their beloved leader, because under communism or under fascism, it's not ruled by competence. It's ruled by competence and butt kissing. And so Trump is not necessarily told about all of the negative outcomes associated with coronavirus. Jared Kushner, who's been advising Trump on the subject, apparently thinks of it more as a problem of human psychology rather than actual physical outcomes. And at least with Jared Kushner, we can show bipartisanship, because we can say Jared Kushner used to be a Democrat. Complete amoral, unethical behavior is not restricted to Republicans. That's important to recognize, because we want to have credibility as we try to pass on messages about public health, etc. So Jared Kushner, a former Democrat, is now obviously one of the key Republicans advising his father-in-law, and he has no idea. Jared Kushner is terrible, and he was able to gain security clearance for his role being paid by the American people only because Trump pushed for the White House the security clearance to be issued to his son-in-law and daughter, Ivanka Trump. So it is very scary because all of that governing for optics, all of that painting wood in the color of vegetables and pretending to Mao that his agricultural changes were working, because totalitarianism government, be it fascistic or communistic, very efficient at imposing top-down rule. And so people sometimes support such leaders. They say, yes, having one person in charge with supreme authority is efficient. There's a backlash against America's three system of governance because people have been so poisoned since Ronald Reagan saying, essentially, government is the problem. So not everybody felt the government was the problem, but a critical mass of people reached that point of disaffection with government that they would vote for a rule breaker, a systems disruptor such as Trump, and go, yes, having somebody who breaks the rules, who sidesteps Congress, who erodes the separation of branches of government, who usurps some of the powers of the purse. That's efficient, they say, because he has our best interests in heart and he's a businessman. He'll do what's right. And now more and more people are waking up to the fact that unitary executive power is bad, and the framers tried to guard against that by having a separation of powers in order to prevent tyranny and a bad person telling the American public bad things purely to preserve their own power. So Trump has lied to the American people about the nature of the coronavirus 19. He told them it was no worse than the flu. He lied repeatedly that there were only 15 cases. He lied that those cases would soon go to zero. All the while delaying testing. The Trump-appointed head of the CDC, Robert Redfield, was not facilitating testing procedures. And instead of following the lead of many other countries and using the test developed by the WHO, the World Health Organization, the CDC decided to develop their own tests, developed faulty tests and distributed those, and then said, okay, we'll start from scratch and try again. America is still massively behind the testing regimen that was needed a few weeks ago to contain community transmission. So it could very well be on purpose. If you have a look at the graph behind me, and can you see that? I've got some measures which save lives, and it's called social distancing. I say save lives, save systems, because this dotted line here indicates the capacity of your healthcare systems, healthcare capacity, ... And this is what a transmission graph looks like if no security measures, no social distancing measures are taken, if things aren't cancelled, if people still keep going to school and having parties. Everybody gets it very rapidly. Transmission is very rapid, but it exceeds the capacity of the healthcare system. So all of these people here are finding it difficult to get a bed. And not just people with the disease. You have to understand that once a hospital is overwhelmed, pregnant women will struggle to give birth in a hospital. If your child falls over and needs stitches, they're going to struggle to get admission to an overwhelmed hospital system where where procedures are breaking down and healthcare workers are falling sick, fainting from dehydration inside their hazmat suits, etc. So this is a softer curve where if social distancing measures are taken and the rate of transmission is slowed. So still the same amount of people get the disease, but it's spread over time and thus avoids exceeding this line here, which, if you remember, is the upper limit on your health system capacity. So this capacity is a very important consideration, and everybody needs to be calling their senators and their congressmen, regardless of your political affiliation or regardless of your senator's political affiliation, because public pressure needs to ramp up to get those measures passed straight away. The degree of incompetence on the part of the Trump administration is likely not just incompetence, but potentially incompetence done with a cavalier purposefulness because they also hope to benefit from chaos. They're afraid of losing an election to Joe Biden, which is rational, but they are also rationally hoping to benefit from chaos, as many totalitarian leaders do. It's harder to focus on priorities. It's harder to organize for the ousting of a government if everybody's sick, fighting for their lives, fighting for their jobs, fighting for their homes. So the degree of dysfunction which Trump is prepared to unleash upon the American people is high. He's got nothing to lose because he faces prison. And for people who forget that Trump is already unindicted co-conspirator number one from the charges that have landed Michael Cohen in jail for a 5-year period, Trump ordered Michael Cohen to take the actions that he's now in prison for in relation to electoral fraud, to giving payments to Stormy Daniels, or Stephanie Cliffords as her real name is, in order to deceive the American public and conceal from them Trump's unprotected sex with a porn star shortly after the birth of his third son to his third wife. So, yes, I would like, if anybody's on here who's appointed an administrator, for them to block the troll. And Bernie trolls and Kremlin trolls are fairly indistinguishable because they're both locked into a similar agenda, which is just to disrupt. Russians obviously want to disrupt American geopolitical power and give the Kremlin more of an opportunity to invade neighboring European countries and acquire their fossil fuel assets. So yes, Putin would like to be more unleashed. He would also like for his puppet president to wind down sanctions. And the more the world is in chaos, the more Trump can do that without it inviting outrage. Oh, thank you. You blocked them. Lovely. Yes, people who don't agree with reality, people who spread disinformation, are constitutionally defined as trolls. Because a troll is somebody who's purposely or unwittingly spreading disinformation. So you can believe that you want Bernie Sanders because you care about poor people, but at the same time you reject the legitimacy of the massive black voters, suburban voters, older voters, and even Trump-repelled former Republicans who have all turned out in massive numbers to vote for Joe Biden. So Bernie, it's ludicrous for Bernie to still be competing anymore at all, considering the degree of his defeat in the primaries. But Bernie's a spoiler candidate. So his narcissism and ego have been carefully cultivated, I would imagine, by online disinformation campaigns from the Kremlin. I'm not necessarily claiming that anyone from the Kremlin got in touch with Bernie. I don't think that would be necessary. But no wonder the dude had a heart attack. Every time he faces the concept of losing this primary race, he'll have to reckon with the morality of what he did in 2016, which was be informed by campaign members on his campaign that there were Russian trolls on his Facebook page or Russian accounts attacking Hillary Clinton. And he did not go public with that. He chose not to go public with that. He chose to undermine with his silence Hillary Clinton's claim that she was being attacked by Russians, that American democracy was under attack from a concerted campaign orchestrated by the Kremlin. So Hillary Clinton went public with that speculation, and Bernie Sanders was sitting on evidence to support that, and he chose not to. He chose not to, clearly in the hope that Hillary would lose, Trump would be elected, and that would strengthen his second run for the presidency. So 2 days before the election, Bernie Sanders tweeted out something placatory to Trump supporters who used to support him. He said he didn't think that there was anything sexist or racist, or that we can Google it. Bernie Sanders tweet. I don't think there's anything sexist or racist about voting for Trump. Okay, I can go directly to his Twitter account. That's awesome. and share it with you. It's not a screenshot. It's his actual Twitter page. Ah, hello. Oh. Hello, I'm just joining in my own broadcast, if this works, to say that my laptop is frozen, so I'm using my phone. If people get to see that, my apologies. But what I was trying to do was cross live to a former tweet from Bernie Sanders saying, I do not believe that it's sexist or racist to support Donald Trump. And that flew under the radar, that particular tweet, but it was a couple of days before the election. It was giving permission to enough Bernie Sanders voters to vote for Trump to swing the Electoral College vote to Trump. Bernie wouldn't have known that, but he was just one part of the Kremlin strategy to harness someone's narcissism and conviction that only they could solve the problems of America, only they could resolve poverty. But at the same time, Bernie's longstanding conviction that only he should be president hasn't been matched by passing legislation. He hasn't cooperated with people. He hasn't worked well within the confines of the actual system of America, the three-branch government, where you work with your colleagues to pass laws in Congress that then get signed into law by the president. He's just been patiently campaigning. His whole Senate career would appear to be a slow building campaign for presidency because he didn't believe enough in the legislative branch to pass any legislation that could have helped people. In his tenure as senator, he passed 2 bills to rename post offices and 1 bill to extend benefits for veterans, healthcare benefits for veterans. So that's one piece of legislation. He could have been working on Medicare for All bills for helping transition America to Medicare for All. So my laptop is still having a couple of problems. What if I open a new browser? Will that help me? In any case, I'll continue to talk and I'll continue to show you the frame behind me, which says social distancing saves lives and saves systems, because I'm just taking one small step on my part to urge people to be advocates for social distancing, for staying home where possible, for staying home and calling your representatives to pass the bill put forward by the House Democrats to provide hardship relief so that people can stay home, sick leave so people with obvious symptoms can stay home, to advocate for the cancelling of events just to slow the pace of transmission for long enough to make sure that American healthcare system is not overwhelmed within a few weeks, as Italy's healthcare system currently is overwhelmed. So if you see what their intensive care units look like, there's people lying face down because apparently that helps with oxygen saturation. People lying face down, hooked up to IVs and respirator units. It takes 2 to 3 weeks of oxygen treatment for some of these people who are severely impacted by the disease to recover. And Italian doctors have told the world that they are making these decisions on very difficult bases. So they're having to decide between young people and older people. Does this 40-year-old have children? Is that more value than saving their life over this other 40-year-old who's very fit and healthy, but doesn't have children? So imagine having to make clinical judgments about who you will allow to have a bed in intensive care because there are far more patients than there are beds. So America's healthcare system is already close to capacity in terms of intensive care beds in any case. So, yes, it was a lie that Obamacare was associated with death panels. This is a manifestation of that circumstance, which was projected by Sarah Palin, because Sarah Palin is a manifestation of Republican willingness to lie about Democrats. Sarah Palin was an acceleration of that tendency to lie about and misrepresent your political opponents and their policies. Policies designed for the public good, but to pretend that they were. So, a Bible person thinking that clean food, people think they could do anything. Yes, yes. Are you wanting to argue that this is all a biblical punishment for straying from the Bible? It is, in fact, people who are overly reliant on the Bible to find meaning in their lives who have pushed President Trump on the world and the consequent global depression and the consequent massive loss of lives in America and crashing of the stock market, because their insistence on forcing women to go through with pregnancies that they don't wish to go through with, and their belief that that is the only step necessary to take via government, has put us all in this precarious position. So, no, look, China is making great progress with renewable energy, but it's undeniable that there are lots of coal plants in China, and the poor air quality in many regions in China certainly would have been a compounding factor for the impact of the Wuhan, of the outbreak in Wuhan, the COVID-19 virus. Yes, but China is also making a significant effort. So if America hadn't withdrawn from the Paris Agreement and America was doing more to lead the world, and when I say America, I mean Trump at this point. Trump has sabotaged climate change activity. He's sabotaged global efforts. Not that they're ruined. People are still independently working on making the changes that humanity needs to preserve a degree of civilization. Let's see if my laptop is back again up to speed. No, still not working. Maybe I'll just shut down the broadcast and start again. Oh, close the program. I can do that. $14 people. Okay. I'm returning to the previous broadcast. Thank you all for joining, but there's another one. What if oh, it started already. So here we go, guys. Share screen. I'm going to try it again. I'm currently running 2 broadcasts, but this one's going to close. Done. Okay. Now let's have a look. Bernie Sanders, November the 6th, 2016, saying, "I do not believe that most of the people who were thinking about voting for Mr. Trump are racist or sexist." So, dear Trump supporters, vote for Trump. You have my blessing. That's essentially what Bernie Sanders did. I will make that big screen for you. So watch, you can see that it is not blah, blah, blah. It is not a screenshot because I can react to it now. This is evidence of Bernie Sanders' gamble on winning 2020 after a disastrous Trump administration. Oh, Trump term. There we go. I spelled disastrous wrong. Oh, I can't possibly, for my ego, put that up. Forgotten how to spell disastrous. What have I done wrong? Disastrous. No. There we go. We can see that I have now replied to that Bernie Sanders comment. I'll put my face back on the screen. Here we go. So I'm not trolling when I say that Bernie Sanders' insistence on staying in the primary race now is part of his ongoing use as a Kremlin tool to continue to sabotage American democracy. Disastrous. Okay, I was spelling it properly, and just maybe autocorrect was having a problem. All right. I thought maybe the American spelling of disastrous is different. Thanks for your help, Jeff. So yes, I like to explain to people about Bernie Sanders because we can use group brainstorming to determine how to best mitigate the threat that his supporters and he himself pose to democracy. So going online and demeaning Joe Biden, mischaracterizing his attempts to work around a stutter. Now, as someone from an educational background, I can tell you that with a stutter, if you interrupt, I'll put my face back up here again. If you interrupt what you're going to say because you are anticipating a stutter, or you're feeling some of the neurological cues, meaning you're about to stutter, what many stutterers do who have adjusted to their condition is something that's described in official terminology as circumlocution. So it's a workaround. You change tack and divert what you're going to say because a particular word in your pre-programmed set of what you're about to say, you know that you might stutter on that word. So you want to say Tuesday and your brain is like, that's going to be a stutter if you say that out loud, if you say Tuesday. So you change tack and you say on a day of the week that's not Wednesday, or the day of the week that comes just before Wednesday, or you just start talking about something else. It can seem a little abrupt. It can seem unfortunate, but it would be a habitual adjustment that you would make if you were a lifelong person who had sought to overcome a stutter. So that's my argument to people, to point out to them that all of this propaganda nonsense trying to undermine Joe Biden is bad and wrong. But a lot of Americans are so excited about the prospect of voting out Donald Trump that I'm hoping it wouldn't matter that much. There really is so much enthusiasm because a lot of former Republicans, people who may even still call themselves Republicans now, Particularly people who have lost all of their retirement savings are going to be highly motivated to vote out that man whose incompetence has been on sharp display. And they might not all be cued into the fact that this is beyond incompetence. Trump has malevolently stopped the CDC from proceeding adequately with testing. We need CDC whistleblowers to say who gave the order to not use the WHO tests, who gave the order to send DHHS staff, Department of Health and Human Services staff, to go to Travis Air Base without adequate protective gear or training and interact directly with repatriated Americans from Wuhan in China. So I'm not making that up. I will now go to the NBC article, which I can do fairly easily so that people can see. There we go. Coronavirus whistleblower. Feds helping evacuees lacked protective gear. Let's just check. Is that, you can see that? Yes. I'll scroll up to the headline so we can see it more clearly, because I know you can't all read, but headlines you can see. Okay. Coronavirus whistleblower. Feds helping evacuees lacked protection. Although the team had gloves at times and masks at times, they lacked adequate gear and received no training, a congressional office said. So I'm going to scroll down a bit, bear with me. A government whistleblower has filed a complaint alleging that at least a dozen, so 12 federal workers, did not have the necessary protective gear or training when they were deployed to help Americans evacuated from China. I've been talking about this a little bit because it needs to be considered in light of the Republican Party trying to build an association between the coronavirus and outsiders. So when Mark Meadows and Dan Crenshaw started tweeting and calling it the Wuhan virus or the China virus, they're trying to amplify and build up on and then benefit from any irrational racism. So it's irrational because the virus doesn't discriminate according to nationality. The virus is already in America. It doesn't say, oh, I'll only infect Chinese people, so as long as you avoid Chinese people, you'll be safe. Some people do think like that. They avoid Chinese restaurants, etc. There's a half-truth that racists always can build on. Yes, perhaps this crime rate is higher or this something is higher, and they get people to over-extrapolate from half-truths to build political momentum behind their promises, their implicit promises to keep America white. And those implicit promises are signaled to their base with things like travel bans, banning Muslim people and banning now people from Europe, as if to reassure people that bans are a sufficient health protective measure. And they're not. So let's scroll down a little bit more, but then we're also going to talk about how the world is going to change as a consequence. So it's not set in stone what lies ahead, but without significant public pressure to have social distancing measures and shutting things down. Let me just make this smaller again. Okay, without significant measures so this is when people have rallies. This is what an infection curve looked like in Philadelphia during the 1918 Spanish flu pandemic. Philadelphia had parades and St. Louis shut down public events. So St. Louis hospitals were okay and you didn't see a mass infections of health workers and mass overwhelm of hospital systems. But Philadelphia had a higher death rate because their infections, both of them ended up having the similar number of people infected. But when you have a concentrated rate of infections early on, you exceed this line. Imagine this is your healthcare capacity line. So this is how many beds you have and how much your hospital system can take. You exceed that line with that much success. Oh, whoops, my microphone was all the way over there. It's probably been quite difficult to hear me. How are you guys? Could you hear me before? Obviously you can a little bit, but still. Thank you for bearing with me for that. If you ever have any hearing, if it's unclear, always let me know in the comments section. Even if I don't notice straight away, I'll pay attention. You heard, that's good. Excellent. What a good microphone then. Yes, good mic. Okay. I'm going to look at an article now that talks about how things will change post the coronavirus as well. Because a lot of luxury industries, luxury travel, companies sending their employees on business trips, once this has subsided, people will realize those industries aren't strictly necessary. You can restrict your business expenditure by just not having so many conferences. There's technology that exists now to do conference calls between countries, and they'll do that. People won't go back to the same lifestyle of having employees not tell their bosses that actually business class tickets aren't necessary. They don't need to fly across the country. They don't need to fly to Europe. A lot of the excess is going to be permanently pruned from the system. And the thing about that is that this is not an economic recession that's just going to have a little V spike, like it sharply dips and then goes up again. There are going to be long-term, ongoing reconfigurations of the American economy and the American lifestyle and the American working style for a lot of businesses. So the world is going to change significantly. In the short term, over the next few weeks, there's different pathways. If we don't stay in place and shut down schools and give up going to restaurants, and if we don't have a government that supports businesses and supports workers through the sharp financial pain of all of those industries that involve consumer spending. And the American economy is about 70% consumer spending. So if consumer spending is effectively suspended for a few weeks, that would save lives, but the economy will be very hard hit. And if those measures aren't taken and people continue to go about their lives and spend money, go to schools, etc., then the economy won't be hard hit straight away, but the economy will be hard hit because of the mass overwhelm of hospital systems and the massive breakdowns that would follow from that, from not having put measures in place to not get this scenario with this much exceeding your hospital system's capacity. So this is capacity line. If you've got this situation because there are still rallies and there's still sporting events, then your hospital systems can't take it. And America is very uniquely set up to suffer severely in the event of this type of pandemic, because you have such an underclass of people who can't afford sick leave, whose children are dependent on meals obtained through their school. So many people who will lose their homes if their source of income dries up, if their casual job isn't happening. So people who can't get medical treatment, who are underinsured or uninsured, whose junk insurance bonds that they've bought through President Trump's provision of junk bonds, junk insurance plans, those people can't get treated. If you can't get treated for the virus, potentially you'll spread it even more. If you die on the street and people come to help move your body off the street, infecting more people, you're going to see Iranian levels of societal collapse. CNBC flew your son from New Jersey to Ohio to plug a mic into a camera. Wow. Brian's pointing out that he can tell me from experience we are way behind in our hospital systems. I would believe that also. So Italy is ranked number 2 for hospital systems in the world, and Italy is overwhelmed. Italy has a higher proportion of elderly people in its society, which has exacerbated the crisis for them. but America has a hospital system that's rated 27th in the world, I believe. So, and Trump gutted your pandemic response system. He fired the teams that Obama had instituted after Ebola and SARS, and he did not replace those people. He's also cut funding to the CDC and also put people at the head of the CDC who are massive anti-abortionists, pro-religious people who are sucked into that goal of keeping Trump in power in order to overturn current societal standards. So the fact that a majority of people want women to be able to access abortion if they want to, their goal of overturning that and cementing power for religious organizations, their goal of forcing you to forget about all of the child abuse that's been overlooked and facilitated by various religious institutions, all of the wealthy religious people who have a gospel in their heart of, if I'm wealthy, it means God loves me and I'm good. And if you're poor, you're not a good person and God has punished you for it and I don't have to care about you. Those people whose religion has driven their isolation from the goals of good public governance, those people are in charge, and those people are very determined to enhance and keep their hold on power. Yes, funding was stopped for the development of a corona vaccine, which might have worked on a number of variants of the coronavirus, one of which is COVID-19. Vaccines are certainly the least profitable part of pharmaceutical companies' activities. So, yes, it's not a big pharma conspiracy to have stopped research. It's a failure of government, because private enterprise shouldn't and can't run public affairs. The concept of government is collectively pooling your funds and choosing leaders who will wisely administer those funds and make important decisions to safeguard people, to keep people safe. And that's why Trump has been able to find a path to power, because of various vulnerabilities in the collective psychological makeup of American people after 9/11. The residual suspicion of outsiders, the residual conservatism and suspicion of people and women in leadership roles, that also helped to undermine the vote for Hillary Clinton in key battleground states. Just too many white men going, nope, no woman should be in charge of our country. So at least American voters have been sufficiently cautious that they haven't exposed America to that problematic dynamic again. Elizabeth Warren just also didn't have a lot of support. More broadly speaking, she had a lot of support from intelligent people, from well-educated people, which doesn't mean that they were right. It means that they were approaching the problem of selecting a candidate by saying who is good at communicating policies, who is good at communicating the need to address corruption in the political system. Those were the characteristics that intelligent, educated people were looking to, those who voted for Elizabeth Warren. And they suffered amnesia in relation to the lessons of 2016, that American presidential elections are not predicated on who is most broadly popular. They're predicated on the Electoral College results, which habitually overturn the popular vote results whenever there is a broader gap than usual between rural and urban attitudes. And there is a gap between rural and urban attitudes because rural people have watched more Fox News. And they've been more interested in turning on Fox News because they can see in popular media that more people are advocating for women. And they are afraid for a loss of status and privilege for men. And some of those fears are well-grounded. Some of those fears of losing public sympathy, collectively speaking, for men, that's very real. A loss of sympathy for men made people too willing and eager to believe Amber Heard, who made accusations of domestic abuse against Johnny Depp, and court documents and testimony is unfolding now that reveals Amber Heard is quite likely a psychopathic narcissist who systematically abused Johnny Depp and still tried to turn the tables on him and claim he was a domestic abuser for her own personal advantage, to raise her profile win her movie roles, and attract more sympathy towards her. So if you haven't been following the Amber Heard story, her personal assistant just testified recently that Amber was very aggressive, was on very strong medication to not have acne, which is supposed to be only used for a short period of time, but she used it for longer, and that it has a stimulatory effect that Amber would then counteract by drinking a lot of red wine or wine in the evenings, and would just rage at her personal assistant. And yes, so Johnny Depp, within a month of being married to Amber Heard, had the tip of his finger cut off by glass fragments from a bottle of vodka that she threw at him. And that he had multiple surgeries to reattach the tip of his finger, contracted multi-resistant staphylococcus 3 times in his various hospital stays, and just suffered immensely at her hands. That Amber Heard is a domestic abuser, and we really have to consider not just blanket awarding of sympathy to women who tell us something's happened. And I'm a very feministly minded person who wants to counteract the potential effect of biases against women. But if we are not careful with our condemnation, so that we also be prepared to reserve judgment in some instances, so that we don't encourage psychopathic people to take advantage of knowing how set in stone we are with our sympathies. Our sympathies have to be a little bit more reserved and not so automatized that we go, women are right, men are wrong. So I'm more indulgent now for the not all men movement. A lot of it's fueled by men who won't admit at all that there's a problem with domestic violence instigated by men, or that there's many more female victims than there are male victims of domestic violence. But they have a point that women's insistence on redressing injustice has led to a crowding out of space to acknowledge male victims. Feminism should be bringing male victims out of the woodwork and not belittling them, showing a receptivity to their points and saying, yes, men can be victimized by women, even women who are less physically strong than them. It's not just a question of physical strength. It's a question of entitlement, bad intent, malevolence, and disrespect. So yes, the fact that a lot of women are not respected by their male partners doesn't mean that some women also have low respect for their male partners. We have new viewers joining, and Trump certainly has compounded the effects of the virus by sabotaging containment measures, by making the CDC not use the available tests from the World Health Organization, but likely being the person who directed the CDC to delay testing, to have a test with, I don't know that Trump particularly sabotaged the component parts of the test, but what a coincidence. The test initially developed by the CDC and was sent out, those test kits were faulty and the test results were not accurate. And then they went back and started from scratch again, instead of availing themselves of the World Health Organization's already established tests, which would have saved countless lives and reduced community transmission. If you'd been able to test more people and identify who had the condition, more people could have been in quarantine. There could have been less broad transmission of the disease. And lots of people can get the disease and not die. 8% of people with underlying conditions who contract the disease are likely to die. There's an 8% fatality rate amongst elderly people, and that's increased for people who are both over 70 and have comorbidities such as cardiovascular problems or respiratory problems. So yes, Trump's behavior, Trump's inconsistencies have spooked the stock market as well. The stock market started to plummet yesterday as Trump gave a speech laden with misinformation, in which he announced measures that weren't going to address the fact that the virus was already rapidly spreading in America, and that identified cases are clearly very underreported because everybody's telling us they can't be tested, that they've gone to their hospitals with symptoms and they've been told tests are not available, or if they have been tested, the test results haven't been returned in a timely fashion for even up to a week. So Tom Hanks got tested for coronavirus, but he was in Australia. And even Australia, they're not taking it seriously enough either, because there's a very corrupt conservative government in power in Australia as well. I'll call them the mini Trumps. So somebody here seems to be postulating that the coronavirus 19 was created to crush Hong Kong uprising. Do you know what? I sometimes make a case for various conspiracy theories that I'm like, people are conspiring. This is something happening behind the scenes, and I make a case for those arguments. So I've made a case today for the Trump administration having purposefully sent Department of Health and Human Services to send people. So the whistleblower was actually one of them. Wow. I'm reading back to this. The whistleblower from the Department of Health and Human Services was among a team of about a dozen employees from the agency who had been deployed to help connect the evacuees, American evacuees from China, with government assistance that they might qualify for to ease their return. The team was there from mid-January until earlier this month. Gomez's office said the whistleblower complained to superiors and was given the choice of being reassigned or fired. Gomez said, as far as he knows, none of the workers from the agency has become infected with the virus. That's probably not true anymore, is it? The COVID-19 illness. China was still the hardest hit country. Yes. This article is a little bit old, so it said no cases confirmed in the United States. Dozens of cases, but no deaths have been confirmed in the United States. All right. So they asked Alex Azar about it, and he responded that he was not aware of any violation of protective practices. And he said something placatory like, oh yeah, urgency does not compensate for violating isolation and quarantine protocols. He said, I'd want to know the full facts and would take appropriate remedial measures. So basically the Nazis in power are pretending they don't know about the whistleblower's complaint, saying that, yep, staff were exposed to high-risk evacuees. And we need a follow-up on that. So this article is old. This article is from February the 28th. So we need to read more news articles about that. Follow up. I think the lawyer for the whistleblower, his name is Feldman. Alex Feldman, I think. I'll see if I can Google that. Alex Feldman, lawyer, corona, whistleblower. See if there's an update. Nope, there's a Time magazine article from February 27th. Oh, no, okay. The lawyer's name is Ari Wilkenfeld. Okay, I'm going to click on the Time magazine article, which might have more details, and then I'll share that with you as well. Cleveland Clinic has developed a test that diagnoses COVID-19 in hours. Well, Singapore was testing people with results in 3 to 4 hours last week. So, yes, best practice American innovation is still behind the 8 ball here. But it's good that clinics have developed the test. The clinic in Seattle that was testing for COVID-19 without permission from the CDC. They defied the CDC and they identified a teenager who had the virus. All right. I'm ignoring the person asking me questions about an old epidemic because it sounds like they're trying to minimize what this epidemic is. So here's Time magazine. Oh, can you see this yet? No. I'll put it on screen. So we can block the troll if we like. Dun, dun, dun. Let's see how this is going. Okay. So Time magazine, you might be able to see it or you might not, but I'm going to read a little bit. So it seems to be a lot about the fact that the whistleblower was retaliated against. The complaint was filed by a high-ranking official at the Administration for Children and Families, an HHS social service agency. Okay. So the team members had no respirators, and whilst helping the evacuees, team members noticed that workers from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, from the CDC, were in full gear, full hazmat gear, to protect them from getting sick. So Ari Wilkenfeld, a lawyer representing the unidentified whistleblower, said in a statement, "This matter concerns HHS's response to the coronavirus and its failure to protect its employees and potentially the public." So the whistleblower complaint was first reported by the Washington Post. All right. I hope that lawyer, Ari Wilkenfeld, is on Twitter. That would be great. Because, yes, we can mute trolls. We don't need to address their concerns because their concerns will be addressed within 2 weeks or 1 week when, what are we up to now? March. On some predicted trajectories, American hospitals reach overwhelm by early May at the projected escalation rates of contagion, but it could be earlier. And when I say overwhelm, I just mean intensive care units full and decisions having to be made about who to treat and who to leave to die. Because if you need treatment and you need oxygen tanks and you need that kind of high level bed occupation for 2 to 3 weeks in an intensive care unit and you can't get it, then you're on your own to die. You can't live without oxygen. And if you've got COVID-19 and you can't get treatment, then yeah, that's it for you. So support your healthcare workers. Brian, you take care of yourself. I wish you all the best. From reading threads from people who've lived through pandemics in hospitals, they say time blurs, you're just pushed to your limits. But so normality goes out the window and you're just making big decisions as fast as you can and just trying to treat people with the best prognosis. So we should be looking for psychological help for healthcare workers once it passes as well. But more importantly, before then, we should be preparing healthcare workers for what is likely to be an onslaught of cases, because community transmission is likely to have occurred substantially with Americans unaware of it because Trump has delayed testing, sabotaging his own CDC, America's CDC. And their reputation with on-the-ball people right now is in the toilet. And they're being led by someone, Robert Redfield, who is highly religious and supports that second coming of Trumpism type ideology. You try your best. Thank you so much. Brian saying his hospital only has 12 ICU beds, and I don't think we have 12 ventilators. Exactly. So when your hospital has more than 12 cases of people who need ICU beds, and more than however many ventilators you have, if you've got 10 ventilators, if you have more than 10 people who need ventilation, because 30% of people in your community have it, and 20% of them elderly people or people with underlying conditions, diabetes, asthma, respiratory compromise, heart, cardiovascular problems, etc. All those people who are more likely to be pushed over the edge into needing significant assistance. That's going to be the life or death decisions that hospital workers will be making in probably a few weeks, unless state governments are really proactive. So another step that we can take today, and I'll post an article that I have been sharing by Indivisible. Maybe we should read through it. Indivisible Corona Action. COVID-19. I have to go and email that to myself. So the NBA season being suspended probably would have woken up a lot of people to the fact that this is not a hoax. Tom Hanks being diagnosed would have helped wake a lot of people up as well. Oops, wrong button. Okay, share screen. We're going to go to an article on what to tell your members of Congress to do about coronavirus. Okay, so the House Leadership Bill, emergency bill to respond to the coronavirus outbreak, with guaranteed paid sick leave for people to take care of themselves or their loved ones, expanded capacity for unemployment insurance system to help stabilize the economic situation, increased federal Medicaid funding to cover more state Medicaid, free coronavirus testing for all people who need it. So that is, actually, no, that hasn't been adopted yet, has it? Because at the moment, what's been adopted is no copays for coronavirus testing from insurance companies. But that doesn't cover the uninsured people, of which there are a significant number of millions of people. And nutrition assistance for families and kids who get foods through programs like the National School Lunch Program. And enhanced protections for healthcare and other high-risk workers to help guard against the risk. So if Republican senators and Republican Congress people have a deluge of calls from people saying this is needed to safeguard us. So we're not just hanging back and shitposting on Twitter about how Trump sucks. If we're taking that action to overwhelm Republicans with the need to just put aside their assumptions that poor people don't need health care and poor people don't matter and you can let them die and it won't impact anyone. We are a community and their fate affects our fate. And if you let the disease run rampant amongst poor people who can't afford testing, then more wealthy people and more middle-class people will also die and the economy will crumble harder because economies run on demand. And if you just let poor people in America die because you've got some attachment to some eugenics type of intellectual conditioning that you've been put through in university or in your church or wherever you got that nonsense from, if you think some people are worth less than others and that their death is desirable, then, and you don't help them, then you're condemning everybody else to devastation and death also. So I think that's a good note for me to conclude on. I'm telling you to call Republicans to help them push through their eugenicism. And if you don't know what eugenicism is, it's just a faux science ideology that says the gene pool is improved if you remove unsuccessful people from it. So in Hitler's Germany, they were using rationalizations developed by American pseudoscientists who wrote about eugenics and wrote about improving the gene pool. So that even well-intentioned people just thought it was the best for mentally ill people to die off, who sterilized people, who sterilized Native Americans, anybody who they thought was less desirable, who they thought had genes that were less valuable, to enhance evolution and enhance the gene pool of the human race. It didn't enhance the gene pool of the human race. It just massively stained the conscience of the human race. And it inspired Hitler's Third Reich people to sterilize the disabled, sterilize people with disabilities, sterilize Jewish people and also kill Jewish people and kill disabled people. So you go from going, they shouldn't have any children, to also, you know what, it's just easier to kill them as well. So I have someone telling me the coronavirus is a theory. Where do you live that you don't care about your hospital system being overwhelmed? Where do you live that it doesn't matter to you if 8% of infected people die if they are over 70? In fact, over 60, the death rate's probably 6%. So it's very high. I'm sure somebody might be left to block the troll. But in any case, I'll post the link to that indivisible resource so people can Google it for themselves if they want, because it should inspire. I can't call a Republican senator. I might be moving to Boston. Looks, not that link. I might be moving to Boston sooner rather than later. It depends really what the fallout is. But my husband, I don't know he's signed it yet, but he accepted a job offer. Oh, look, the Kremlin trolls, these might even just be algorithms coming on and saying this. Like, is there a real person behind this? I don't know, but irresponsible people exist. So trying to contrast this pandemic with other pandemics is just another method of deluding people and trying to deceive people that this isn't as serious as it is. So please do join me in blocking or ignoring those people who are making a concerted effort to deceive the public. All right, so the troll insists that they're not an algorithm, that they're a real live troll. Thanks for making that clear to us. But yes, administrators, please block that person. We do not encourage or condone the propagation of deceit or propaganda campaigns here. Why is that? There we go. Okay, Trump has delayed testing for the coronavirus. Trump has undersold the severity of the disease and of its projected trajectory. The fact that it will impact millions upon millions of Americans. It's likely to overwhelm your healthcare systems in as little as 2 to 3 weeks. That millions of people are going to suffer and die, leading to massive disruption as well as massive economic dysfunction. The stock market's already crashed, so we don't even need to be talking to trolls because reality is speaking pretty loudly and clearly at the moment. Thank you. Pastor, you've got this. I appreciate it. So we'll mute them unless they're saying really derogatory things, in which case block the vicious ones. But if they're just asking troll questions, let's maybe mute them. I sometimes say block because I would like to block them, but at the same time, sometimes I'll leave it to your discretion, administrators, but sometimes I have more indulgence for the idea that maybe they could listen and learn something. But of course, the potential of that is very low because people exposed to significantly repeated propaganda have really curtailed their capacity to learn. Julie's saying, please don't let the trolls waste our time, though. That is fair. So definitely mute straight away, and it's up to your discretion, administrators, if you want to block. Thank you, Julie. I love to think that you're investing your time here and that it wastes your time if we are derailed by trolls, because that reminds me that this has value and that I am potentially helping people by this service that I try to provide. I do it because I feel compelled to, and some people literally pay me to do it as well. I have Patreons. Thank you, Patreons. So that I know if I don't feel like it, I still have to get up and do it because this is my job. And I get compared to what my husband earns, it's very little, but I don't have my husband qualifications either. He is more academically qualified than me, and his years of experience in an industry make his earning capacity higher than mine, but I believe I have something of significant value to offer the public, which is to be a voice talking us through our understanding as we try and put together the various pieces of information. We try to consider and not let be forgotten what might happen to all of the migrants in Trump camps, that I can be a voice, just one person saying, don't forget, there are a host of people without access to soap or adequate nutrition or sleep, all crammed in together in a small space in various camps, many of them built on military bases so that journalists are denied access and lawmakers are denied access. So all of these camps happening out of sight and mostly out of mind. We should remember their existence because the Trump government's possibly planning on digging mass graves for those people. And we won't know unless we ask, and we won't know unless we contact journalists to say, please write a story on this. We won't know unless we evince a degree of human interest in the fate of the migrants who are already being medically neglected. And the consequences of medical neglect during a pandemic are obviously going to equate to mass suffering and mass death. Julie says she likes the perspective of someone living outside the US. Yes, that's good. I'm glad you like that. I'm happy to offer it. Hearing the perspective. Yes. We don't like the contents of the perspective because it tends to be a fairly okay doomer perspective on my side, but that's because I do pay attention to worst case scenarios, because we shouldn't ignore them just for normalcy bias. And yes, I have a familial history with worst case scenarios because my great grandparents perished in a concentration camp, specifically at the hands of an industrialized nation that had voted in a government on the basis of their ability to charismatically unite enough people around the idea that you could advance your society by curtailing a threat, and that threat was Jewish people, and that threat was communists. And the communism, it's fair to be afraid of those people. They're so idealistic that they ignore the fact that communism works out terribly every time it's put into practice, because it negates a basic function of human nature, and that is the need to compete and advance your family's interests, etc. And you can't just sit back and be awarded something equitable by the state. If the state is in charge of distributing everything, those in charge of the state are corrupt and don't do a proper job and aren't held to be accountable because they're just so pure. They're elected to be such pure leaders because communism is so delusionally ideological, so delusionally utopian, that everywhere it's practiced, you have mass famines, whether purposefully intended, such as Stalin's induced famine in Ukraine, where he allowed the Ukrainian people to starve and he controlled food supplies and let that happen on purpose. Or China, where Mao just wanted to show off how great China was and diverted agricultural workers away from food production, as well as changing agricultural processes to his direction. We'll look it up. I always like to look up things I'm talking about. Mao, agriculture, Lamarckism, famine. Okay. Oh, we'll go to Wikipedia this time to look at the Great Leap Forward. So that's still relevant to us because Bernie Sanders tries to sell himself as reasonable, but the people he appeals to are clearly some people, his most fervent supporters, clearly lack pragmatism and often say things like death to capitalism. So changes in the lives of rural Chinese people included the incremental introduction of mandatory agricultural collectivization. Private farming was prohibited. It took out the efficiencies of privatization. Private farming was prohibited, and those engaged in it were persecuted and labeled counter-revolutionaries. Let's see if we go. Famine deaths. or crop experiments. That's the Lamarckism I'm talking about. Okay. So many of these were based on the ideas of now discredited Soviet agronomist Trofim Denisovich Lysenko. Okay. So these policies included close cropping, where seeds were sown far more densely than normal, on the incorrect assumption that seeds of the same class would not compete with each other. Okay, so you just put all the seeds in together and just go, no, they're all in a beautiful, loving collective, and they'll all just grow harmoniously together. Deep plowing, up to 2 meters deep, was encouraged on the mistaken belief that this would yield plants with extra large root systems. So dig a trench, put the seeds down there and go, yep, they'll work their way up to the surface any day now and just have extra large roots, and roots are good. Moderately productive land was left unplanted with the belief that concentrating manure and effort on the most fertile land would lead to large per acre productivity gains. Altogether, these untested innovations generally led to decreases in grain production rather than increases. Meanwhile, local leaders were pressured into falsely reporting higher ever grain production figures to their political superiors. Does this remind you of Trumpism? Does this remind you of all the bizarrely butt-kissing statements you hear from people in the Trump administration? Oh, everything's so great under Trump. This is called totalitarianism, where you have cults of personality and people lie about things. So you will have heard the CDC say last week, yep, lots of tests, 1 million tests are coming. And then this week, oh yes, 75,000 tests are coming. There's a difference between 1 million and 75,000. Okay, so participants at political meetings remembered production figures being inflated up to 10 times actual production amounts as the race to please superiors and win plaudits, like the chance to meet Mao himself, intensified. So how many millions of people died in the famine that resulted as a consequence of this diminished production? Approximately 30 million. So that's a really important thing to talk about. I should make a podcast about it. But people should be able to compare what life was like under communism and the cult leadership to what life is like under Trump, where we laugh at the stupidity of it. We laugh at Trump's ego, and it's a big mistake because government decisions are being made to please Trump's ego. It's not just, Trump's so silly, we'll eventually get to voting out. It's more the question of, oh dear, millions of people could conceivably die now because people are trying to please Trump and not tell him bad news. And people are trying to go along with Trump and delay the reporting of bad news by delaying testing, by delaying the finding out of bad news. So, thank you, DEJ, the pastor, for your help moderating this page today. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Julie, for your feedback. I hope everybody has a great day. I've been talking for 1.5 hours. Can't believe it. See you all next time, and take care of yourselves and each other. Please, please, please. I will copy and paste that indivisible resource again. Please, please read this resource and call your senators. Look, there's a script. I'm totally going to go to the script because scripts help people. All right. The script is going to be the last thing I do. Okay, so this is the form you fill out to be connected with your senators. Where's the script? I don't see the script. It said script, but okay. It's still, after the House passes the bill, we'll need the Senate to act as well, but next week, senators are leaving for a 2-week recess. So there's a very small window of opportunity to get this thing passed, but also it just needs to be passed really quickly as well, because every hour, every day matters in terms of reducing the death toll, the hefty death toll. And when you think about it, don't just think in eugenics terms, oh, well, just old people will die, they were going to die anyway. Think, I could be saving my neighbor down the street who's due to give birth in hospital. I could be saving my neighbor's child who might fall over, have a broken arm, and need hospital treatment. And that treatment might not be available. Those beds might not be available. I might not want to take my child anywhere near to the hospital because so many people might have the illness at that point that I need to stay clear. I might be staying home and wrapping up my child's arm in a handmade splint in a month's time. Call because you can see the future. If you're on Twitter, put Italy into the search engine bar at the top of Twitter and look at the descriptions from Italian doctors and the descriptions from Italian people who have lost loved ones. You can't read Iranian ones, but if you put in Iran and look at video footage of what's happening in Iran, look at the people dying on the street, and motivate yourself to make those calls to your congressmen and congresswomen. There we go. This is the resource. Please just look at keywords from that so you can Google it and copy and paste it yourself, and copy and paste that link to Twitter and encourage everybody you know to do the same thing. It is critical to get through to Republicans that we don't want people to die en masse. We want to reduce the number of dead people. We want to reduce the cost to our society and our economy. Thank you. Thank you so much, everyone. Take care.